Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Ali. And I use this opportunity to express my gratitude to IPS, Mr. Khalid Rahman. It's been a very fruitful and a very wonderful brotherly cooperation, and I think assistance has been given to me all this while. And I do understand the importance of this lecture or webinar, and I do also appreciate the presence and the articulation of all of the previous speakers, how they have been able to dissect this issue of Indian past, present, future, and perspective of the Muslim world. Let me begin to say something in few minutes, that why do we have to understand India, and why do we have to understand from the lens of the Muslims? Let's look at it from demographic issues. Of course, this is well known to all of us that demographically, the Muslims in India are quite significant in number. They are not just insignificant minority, but in actual sense, aside from followed by Indonesia, they can be counted as the second largest Muslim population of the world. Aside from that, the Muslim have ruled India for nearly thousands of years, and which of course explain the richness, the entrenchment of Islam culturally, socially, politically, religiously in that part of the world. I mean, India. Aside from that, we also look at the connectivity, the kind of network India is having with the other parts of Asia, and that kind of resonates with Prime Minister Modi's policy when he came to power in his first term, when he came up with this idea of Look East policy. The whole idea of Look East policy was to assert India cultural, political, social network to the rest of Asia, which span beyond just the ASEAN country, but it also touches the Middle East. Technically, we know that India is having a very good and sound relations with the rest of the Muslims, particularly the Middle Eastern country, from the prism of economy. So there's been a kind of collaboration, people-to-people contact. When you look at emigration of people from India out to the Middle East, you find lots and lots of Indians staying or taking residence in this part of the world. So the leverage India is having upon the Muslim world lies in its emerging technology and productive manpower vis-a-vis the Muslim world. So there is a connection, and we cannot divorce or disassociate ourselves from this. So it is important as Muslims across the globe to understand India from where it stands and how we relate with this particular so-called largest democracy in the world. Meanwhile, we should also understand that India for quite some time have made a landmark. It has marked a landmark, a niche in global affairs during the Cold War era, when India seems to be one of the foremost countries that was supporting decolonization process. And a lot of African countries, the attachment in my position is this: the attachment India is having with the African continent, it is all because of the decolonization old era, or the old argument against the apartheid regime in South Africa. So it is important for Muslims in particular, as well as Africa in general, or the Muslim world in general, to understand all of these peculiarities of India. Now, let us quickly look at India of today. What is India today? India, in my position, India of the past cannot be juxtaposed with India of today for a very, very large reasons. Number one, India was globally considered as a vanguard against imperialism and colonialism, but quite unfortunate, yesterday's oppressed is today oppressor. And I think this has been articulated by all of the speakers before me. I repeat myself, that India, that was once an oppressed society, is now today an oppressor. Similarly, we can also visualize India from the context of liberalization globalization and cosmopolitan project that the Modi government, or even before that, they've been projecting India as a country that welcomes all, as a cosmopolitan country. But quite unfortunate, how far that is true, we don't know. The recent happenings in India, the kind of political, ideological, and philosophical radicalism that we find in India, I think it derogates the position of India as a cosmopolitan society or as a cosmopolitan country. However, this, in my view, is a reminiscence of the Cold War policies of non-alignment movement or anti-colonialism, as suggesting that India is open to all and it is very much ready to associate. We see the dichotomy in Indian foreign policy. India has always been very pragmatic while it relates with the outside world, aside from the regional context. So the smaller countries in South Asia are quite in acrimony or in skirmishes with India, whether it is Nepal, it is Bhutan, it is the big China, it is Pakistan, it is Bangladesh, it's Sri Lanka, even in Maldives. So all 6 countries are not at rest with the existence of India. I'm not here suggesting that India is a troublemaker. That is not my position. But quite apparently, we see that the neighborhoodness of India is not welcoming, conducive for these smaller countries, regardless of the fact that India has always been projecting itself as a cosmopolitan project. Like I said, what is India today? In the lens of Africa, or from an African lens, the issue of Kashmir or the crisis between India and Pakistan is generally situated in the context of geopolitical conflict, or it is just the common conflict between 2 or more countries. That's one of the general perspective in Africa. I think we should be very clear about that. And this is quite characteristical of the syndrome of post-colonial era. That when you look at the old history of Africa, in the post-colonial era of Africa, we see lots of conflict between 2 or more. So take, for example, the crisis or conflict between Cameroon and Nigeria, the crisis between Sierra Leone and Liberia, the crisis between Madagascar or Mauritania and Senegal, the crisis between Burundi and Rwanda or Uganda and Sudan. So there's always been, so it is in that context, in the larger picture. So for most Africans, I think they might not be considering the conflict between India and Pakistan from the lens Pakistanis or India will be looking at it. They simply say, oh, this is not religious. It has nothing religious context in it. It is more or less a geopolitical conflict between 2 neighboring states. Now, allow me to put all of this in perspective. My position is this, which is very clear. I look at this from a very structuralist position, or what I call the political cultural structuralism. Why India behaves the way it behaves today. Number 1, the dehumanization and victimization of Islam and Muslims has become the structure of global politics. Hence, India fits in. So to dehumanize Muslims, or to dehumanize or to victimize Islam is nothing new. So if India is doing the same, it is just playing along with the game. Similarly, India's behavior is not out of play, as I said earlier. It is a calibrated demonstration of playing by the books. Number 2, if the Western countries are doing the same, so why do we have to blame India? And I think we have to look at it from a very structuralist perspective. If the Muslim world is in crisis as a result of the interference or the derogation, dehumanization, victimization by the Western world, why do we have to complain about India? My position is not to show our reservation, but my position is this, that when we put this in context, we can well understand that this is more or less a political, cultural structuralism that India fits in. Number 2, India and Israel are exceedingly enjoying American exceptionalism. I think since 2004, we have seen how India has continuously enjoyed this American exceptionalism. And this American exceptionalism explains the current BJP government actions whether it is within India itself or it is its extraterritorial atrocities in Kashmir, in such a way that American exceptionalism means you have this opportunity to behave otherwise. What other countries would do, and we warrant international condemnation, sanction, India will do it and go scot-free, all because of American exceptionalism, which, for example, the Israelis have been enjoying for quite some time. They continue to persecute the Palestinians, and nothing has gone wrong. Number three, in my understanding, as part of this political, cultural structuralism, is the whole idea of media sensationalism. So look at the media, the international media, it has not been favorable towards the Muslim hand. We've seen the way the media, the way they portray Islam, or they portray a Muslim, when it is a Muslim so-called extremism or terrorism, it is quick to be announced, and we see the frequency with which these news are being, the occurrence, I mean, the way it is being projected in the news, maybe about tens of times as compared to when a non-Muslim commits the same crime. So it is as if Muslim or Islam is genetically or pathologically acclaimed to crimes of violence. And I think this is a very wrong assertion, which I believe is part of the political, cultural structuralism. So the whole global discourse of terrorism, it is so easy for India to quickly or to label Muslims as terrorists, because that is what is in vogue. I'm using an analogy to explain this. I think the previous speaker talks about appetite in Africa or in South Africa at one point in time. Then apartheid would not have survived or would not have flourished if not for the very fact that it was in vogue. That was the structure at that time, colonialism. So since 1902, or when between the British and the Boers, before the British handed over to the Dutch that colonized South Africa, and from 1940s up to 1992s, the Boers, we call them the Boers, or the so-called white South Africans, or what we call them the Afrikaners, the way they continues to colonize, because it was is part of the structure of global politics. Therefore, it is easy for us to situate the situation of India today within this political, cultural structuralism. And that, of course, also explains the constraints of Pakistan. For many years, we have been observing how the Pakistan government and society are quite fanatical about the cause of the Kashmiris. But since 9/11, the whole drama has changed. The way the Pakistani media talks about Kashmir, the way the academics talks about Kashmir, the way the government talks about Kashmir, it's not as President Musharraf was trying to assert that the Kashmir struggle flows in our blood. You know, it's so easy for someone to say that whatever goes on in Kashmir is extremism. How? Why? Because the structure in global politics support the argument of what? Of terrorism and extremism. Let me quickly go, because I know time is not on my side. Let me quickly go to the, in Africa. Let us look at this whole discussion from an African perspective. Number one, I believe there's a huge dichotomy in the African society or African countries. We have two sets of people in Africa, and we have two sets of institutions in Africa. Number one, it is the state and society. The position of India, or the understanding of India, the reading of India, the construct of India is quite different at two fronts. At the society front, at the state front, it is quite different. And this reminds me of James Madison's view that says, and I quote, "The republic will be perceived, will be preserved by the machinery of government, not by the moralities of man." Now, the morality of man refers to society, while machineries of government, so-called realism or pragmatism, refers to the state. And this is the dichotomy. while Muslims at the society level, at the public level, are quite sentimental or sympathetic towards their Muslim brothers in India and in Kashmir. That is not very true for the states in Africa that conceive or see India as an emerging power, as an economic power, as a cosmopolitan project that ought to be related with. So I think we need to understand this dichotomy very clearly. So I call this an ambivalence, one. Number two, within Africa, within the Muslims community in Africa, again, we have the activists and the non-activists. I do remember those days, during Ramadan, there will always be a very thick and heavy prayer for the people of Kashmir, for the people of Palestine. So there is a kind of unity when we talk about Palestine or Kashmir or the crisis between Pakistan and India. It is always with a common voice. But over a period of time, when the issue of Palestine has gone into back burner, I think same goes to the Kashmir issue or the crisis of Muslims in India. It has been so hard for the Muslims at the public level to actually voice their sentiment because no one will hear them. The only manner they could articulate their reservation and against the atrocities in India, it is through the state or through the media. But these two institutions, the media, of course, in Africa, is very much playing the game, playing the card as structuralism as I play. So they play according to what the international media talks about India. Because like I said, India is being projected. There are a lot of businesses of Indians in Africa, all across Africa, even in Nigeria. So the projection of India outside is, and that is kind of understandable from the way the Bollywood movie itself projects India. When you look at Bollywood movie, they wouldn't project India diaspora as extremists. They project them as accommodationists, people who are loyal to their state, to their host country. In the same way, they project them as people who are kind of industrious, people who can contribute to the economy of their host society. So now, by this, we can actually understand the dichotomy I meant. On one hand, India continues to perpetrate atrocities against the Muslims, and the society knows about it. The public knows about it, but they care less. And this careless attitude or carefree attitude, this nonchalant attitude is not actually coming from the society, it is from the state, hence this dichotomy. Secondly, my point here is that, let me quickly move on to my policy options and challenges, because I know a lot of repetition will come out, a lot of things have been said much earlier before I do. So my very first policy option and challenges, which I kind of club these two, is number one, ensuring the constitutional rights of Muslims minority, like every other India citizen, is very pertinent for India to move on. This can be done at the level of United Nations and at the level of Human Rights Council. And I do agree with the last speaker, Imam Abdul Majid, which kind of explained the notion within the Indian policymakers that if India is looking forward to becoming a regional power and eventually in future a global power, therefore India wants to act responsibly by adhering to international norms. Hence, so it is the responsibility of the Muslim world, or whether it is the public or the state, to actually sing the song of the atrocities of India. And we see this even in the last presentation of Prime Minister Imran Khan at the United Nations, which was wonderful. Virtually, we saw no one speaks about the evil of India at that high level. So I think one should give applause to Prime Minister Imran Khan on behalf of Pakistan for doing that, for voicing out, letting the world see what the Indians are doing. So we need to bring this to the United Nations level as well as Human Rights Council. So if India must become a so-called a global player, it has to be responsible. It has to act responsibly. Number two, I also agree with the view of the president of AJK that we need to boycott, or we should start boycotting made in India or any attempt for India, because this is part of Prime Minister Modi's project, made in India. India is trying to project itself as another Japan or as another China, which I don't know how much possible that is. But do we have the possibility, we have the capacity or the propensity to boycott India products? One, how would that happen? So boycotting India would be one way to contain India atrocities, but can only be efficacious when Muslim leaders derogate their personal and national sentiment for the greater Muslims cause. I know this might be controversial, that there is no Muslim cause, there is always a national cause. But at some point in time, we need to strike a balance between the Muslim cause and the national cause. A very good example would be the case of Iran. Regardless of the fact that the Iranians are in good relations with Iran, still the Iranian leaders were able to voice their sentiment against the atrocities of India. And that shows that at one point in time, they derogated their national interests and they uplifted the Muslims' cause. And I think the rest of the Muslim society or state or persons of repute can do the same. And I think Imam Abdul Majid mentioned that few Arab country leaders, they also show their reservation of what is going on in India of today. And I think Pakistan has also been doing that. So for we to be able,
Dr. Bakare, wind up. Thank you.
Yes.
Could you please start winding up? Thank you.
Yes, so I just have 2 points to round up. So I also believe in the cost of OIC, that OIC can actually do that. So if OIC can galvanize the sentiment against Myanmar and to have used Gambia to send Myanmar to the ICJ, or that shows that OIC can do something. In the same way, but we have to understand the power relation between India and Myanmar. So number two, quite unfortunate that there have been a series of resolutions and condemnations of Indian action against the Muslims. But however, at bilateral levels, most of the OIC members are dining and wining with India. Lastly but not the least, in my position is that we should focus on what I refer to as knowledge production, knowledge representation, and knowledge circulation. You cannot fight or you cannot criticize India without production of knowledge, without representing your own idea the way it ought to be represented, and more importantly, knowledge circulation. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you so much, Professor Najimdeen, for a very comprehensive academic perspective of a very important subject. Thank you so much, and also sharing